Alright, welcome gang. Today we are going to resume our comparison of the 3 rune poems which we have read already. Welcome to Yesterlore. I'm Grimm's lawyer. I'm a few minutes late. Technical issues as per often. I don't want to say usual. I've been pretty good recently about at least showing up on time, if not having all my stuff in order on time, but pretty much all my windows were closed, so, or all my sort of display things in OBS were closed, and I had to close some background programs, so that took a few minutes, and I didn't think it was worth you all watching that this time. So, we're going to try to finish today. It's very possible that we will not. I'm realizing, because we did not get as far last time as I had hoped, but we also stopped to do some other things on the way, and I'm going to have less of a preamble this time as I did last time, I think. I'm just going to remind everyone what we are doing in this stream. So, we have read the Old English rune poem together, and the Old Norwegian rune poem, and the Old Icelandic rune poem individually. And what we are doing now is going through each stanza for which there is one in each rune poem, and comparing and contrasting each stanza rune by rune. That is what we have been doing. Looking for connections, similarities, stark differences that we notice. Just anything you notice as we do this comparison, contrast, rereading, sort of reevaluation of everything that we've read thus far. The goal isn't necessarily to prove anything one way or the other about any of the rune poems, just to notice things. We kind of looked at them each individually, now we're looking at them comparatively, and seeing some connections. And the next one has maybe the starkest connection in terms of phrasing between all 3 that we've seen thus far. And that is hægl, or hagall. So I'm going to reread each poem, and then kind of remind you all what the gist of each poem was. If you want the full analysis of each stanza, you can go back and watch those older stream recordings. They are on YouTube. Just going to do a cursory read of each of these and talk about what's sort of similar, what's different, all that kind of stuff. And I'm super encouraging participation from the chat on this. If you are watching this in the future after the stream, I still encourage you to point out things you notice in the YouTube comments. Very much looking forward to reading anything you all noticed there as well. So, let's get started. We've got hægl byð hvítust korna, hvirt hit of hávenes lyfta, walketh hit windes shura, werðeth hit towatra sithan. So, hægl is the whitest of grains. So that word korn means corn in the pre-Columbian sense of just any sort of grain. It's related to the word kernel. So it's the whitest of corn, whitest of grain. Hvítust korna. Hvirt hit of hávenes lyfta. It falls down from the air, the lift is air, of heaven, hávenes lyfta, of the sky. Walketh hit windest shura. Or, yeah, windest shura. Yeah. I'm trying to... I thought that... Oh, no, there's nothing about that in the other ones. I thought I saw a connection I hadn't noticed before. No. Windest shura is the shower of the wind. It's what it sounds like. Shur is shower. And then werðeth hit towatra sithan is then it turns to water. Werðeth hit towatra sithan. Then. So hail is white-green that falls from the sky, then it turns to water. It just is a description of hail. There doesn't really seem to be much of a deep evaluation of the significance of hail here, other than just it exists. And the color is sort of the thing that's pointed out here, the whiteness of hail, compared to just the clearness of most rain water. Let's go on to the Old Norwegian rune poem. We've got hagall kaldastur korna, krister skåp heimen forna. So, hail is kaldastur korna, the coldest of grain. Very similar. This is a connection I have pointed out before because it's so stark. We've got hvitust korna in Old English, whitest grain. And here in Norwegian we've got kaldastur korna, coldest of grain. And then it says Christ created the world long ago, forna. So, yeah, Christ shaped the world long ago. Just, I think when we were reading the Old Norwegian rune poem, the sort of connection I was thinking was, in terms of thematically, things that seem to be true to the person writing the poem. Hail is cold. God created the world from the perspective of the Christian poet. So it's pretty straightforward. One thing that I think someone in chat brought up that on the day of, I think that's when that happened, if I'm remembering correctly, someone brought up the shape of the rune, potentially looking a bit like a cross, like Jesus Christos. Jesus Christos in Greek is like the I with the X that is the k sound, or ch sound in modern Greek, of Christos, Christ. So it could be a reference to the shape. There has been a suggestion that the second halves of these Norwegian rune poem couplets, many of them seem to maybe reference the shape of the rune itself. But it's not super clear. So yeah, the sort of most relevant part is that first part. It's the coldest of grain. Icelandic time. Hagall kalda korn och krapadriva och snaka sot grando hildekur. Reminder, there's going to be a Latin word and then the name, a word for king or ruler after. This part doesn't matter quite as much. This is just grain, or not grain, hail is king. So, hagall kalda korn. Okay, that seems to echo the kaldastur korna here, but it's not quite the same. It's almost like there's a formula here that's like the somethingest of corn that both the Old English and the Norwegian have. The Icelandic doesn't quite keep, maybe for metrical reasons, but it does keep the words from the formula if there's sort of a Scandinavian formula of cold grain, kalda korn, kaldastur korna. That seems to be kept here. The difference is it's not that same sort of blankest of grain that we saw from Old English and Old Norwegian. The krapadriva, we had that we talked about this. It is the krapadriva. I'm blanking on the word here. Why am I forgetting the word? Krapa is... The driva here is like, it's like shura here. It's like shower, coming down. Driving. It's related to drive, I'm pretty sure. But it's like the coming down of krapa. Why am I not remembering that word? It is escaping me. I think it's ice. I think it's a word for ice, if I'm not mistaken. I'm probably mistaken. It's very much escaping me right now. I'm sorry. I'm forgetting what the krapa element of krapa driva is. But it's the shower of ice is the gist here. Please, someone correct me if I'm wrong in comments or chat. And then snaka sot. Snaka sot is the sickness of the snake. It causes sickness for the snake. Potentially, if it's hailing, that's probably not good for a snake. And then, yeah, I already talked about the Latin bit here. So, really the only connection we really see here is the cold grain here that we saw here, and white grain that we saw here. Krapa driva thematically kind of reminds me a bit of Windeshura over here, although it's Windeshura, not like Ideshura, but it's not a very strong connection. Apart from snaka sot, we don't really get any kind of indication of how we're supposed to feel about the hail, other than in the Norwegian and Icelandic that it's cold. The Old English seems to just be describing what hail is like. Alright, let's go on to the next stanza. So we've got Nid bith naru on braustan. Werðið hit tha oft nida bernum. To helpa an to hala jahwavra. Yef he hit hlistað aror. So, constraint, constriction, this word is the source of need, difficulty. Need can be a very vague word, but some kind of constraint, and this is how that is typically translated as well, is constraint, is narrow on braustan, in your heart, in your emotions, makes you feel. Braust is where we get the word breast from. Braust. Werðið tha oft nida bernum. So tha, although, it often becomes for the children of people, sons of men, everyone. That's that formula again of children of a generic word for men, meaning everyone. Help and healing to everyone, to each. If he has hlustað aror, if they heed it, if they listened to it, hlustað, if they list to it, they listen to it, aror, before. If they listen to or heed the constraint or the need early enough, it doesn't need to be a problem. It can be help. So that's an interesting sort of nuanced understanding of constraint here from Old English, as we've kind of gotten with quite a few of the Old English ones. Let's go on to Old Norwegian. We've got Náður görur neppa koste, nøktan kaller I frosti. So, constraint makes a paucity of choice, makes few choices, gives few choices, maybe. So that's that naru on braustan part in Old English, the kind of constrains you, it narrows your ability. And then we get nyktan kaller I frost. A naked one gets cold in the frost. Another sort of, this is true. And also just like being naked, being bereft of clothes will mean you don't really have a choice but to get cold, potentially. That could be a connection between the two. So, few choices that's brought up. Not much else to say there, really. We get some echoed language here. We get the koster being brought up here again, choice. Let's take a look. We've got náð þyjar þrá og þungur kostur og vassamlig verk. Opera niflingur. King. Opera is works, labors, often with more positive, well, not positive, but like neutral connotation of just like work that you have to do. Which work kind of also has a very vague sort of like deeds, works, things you must do sort of sense. But we get some more negative language here. Þyjar þrá. Þyjar of the female servant, it is the thrall, the grief, the we have the word throw in English that it's very sort of frozen. Throw, not throw as in throw, but like sort of the throes of pain. Basically pain, difficulty. And þungur kostur. Kostur here again is sort of choice. And þungur here is basically a similar, it's sort of a synonym to náð here. It's like pressure. The gist here is basically constraint sucks. Having constraints sucks. It is the grief of a servant, and it is like the oppression of choice. And wosamlig werk. Woesomely is sort of the cognate of this. Wosamlig werk is like laborious work, basically. So we've kind of gone from various sort of nuanced, like seeing the bright side of constraint to the absolute most negative way to view constraints. Other than that, I don't really see any strong connections. I just sort of see that contrast of like the need is, or sort of constraint is narrow for the soul, but it can be helpful if you pay attention to it early enough. It could be like a warning sign. Here it's just need gives you a few choices. Here it's need sucks. When I say need, I'm just using the cognate. I'm not actually saying this means need. It means constraint or a limitation or requirement. And in that sense, that's where we get the sense need in English. That sort of requirement sense becomes the main sense that we get in English. So, let's move on to is, if there's no comments or questions on need here. So, we've got is. Is bith over child unje metun slidor. Glisnath glashlutur jemmum jelikost. Flor forste je walucht fire ansine. So, ice, this is ice, is overly cold. It's very cold. Immeasurably slippery. Slid or slidey. It causes you to slide. Glisnath glashlutur jemmum jelikost. So it glistens like sort of with glass. Hlutur is distantly related to the word luster. It's like the reflection of glass. It has sort of like if you hold it in light, it will reflect. Most like yimmum, like gems. Yim is gem. Most like gems. Flor forste je warugt fire ansina. It sort of creates a floor of frost that is beautiful to see. Fire, fair, ansina, a beautiful sight. So ice is slippery and very cold, but that's about as negative as we get about ice. Ice is very cold, very slippery. It's also very pretty. We like ice in the Old English rune poem. Just like we were kind of neutral in hail. We like ice. Ice is pretty. Winter Wonderland kind of feel here. Let's go to Norway. Is kollum bru breida, blindan tharf at leida. Ice, kollum bru breida. We call it the broad bridge, the wide bridge. I guess if a river freezes over, now you got a bridge, if it is thick enough ice. And then we get blindan tharf at leida. It's required for the blind one to be led. Leida, to lead. Someone who's blind may need assistance with getting around. Again, these Norwegian second these second lines often tend to just be sort of like observations about life at the time. So we don't really have anything very concrete here other than hopefully the ice that you're using as a bridge. We call ice the broad bridge. Okay, cool. Good to know. I don't really see any connections. The disconnection I see is we just don't have any kind of comparison to make at all. Let's go to Iceland. Is arborkur och underþak och feigra manna far glacies jovor. Glacies. I'm going back and forth between different ecclesiastical pronunciations, sorry. And glacies jovor, king ice in Latin. So, is, ice, is, sorry, I'm just updating my notes here. Ice is arborkur. It is, ar here is the genitive of al, which is river. It is the bark of the river. Arbork. It is the bark of the river. And unnarthak. It is thak, the thatch, the roof of the wave. Unnar is of the wave. The Old English cognate is ooth for wave, or ootha. Can't remember if it's ooth or ootha. I'm forgetting which declension it is, that's why. Think it's ooth, but it's one of those words that almost always shows up in the plural, in which case it would be ootha. So, either way, it means wave. Och feigra manna far. And the feigra manna far. We just talked about the Icelandic group poem, and now I'm getting foggy here. far can mean few, but I don't think it means few here. Of men, few of men. Maybe it is few of men. Fægr, though, is the important bit here. Fægr here is sort of fey, F-E-Y, which means sort of doomed to die. Having a sort of premonition of death or having doom of death. It can also just sort of be more generally doomed in the more modern English sense where doom is very negative. The word doom, I think I've talked about this before, dom in Old English, domr in Old Norse. It's just like judgment. You deem a doom. Deeming means judging, making a decision, a judgment, and doom is what you decide. It's your decision or your judgment. But the sense of doom has sort of evolved over time, mostly because of the context of its use for, in the phrase domes die in Old English. Domes die is the day of doom, as in the day of judgment, judgment day. And so that sort of sense of apocalyptic significance has been imparted just in general to the word doom. And now doom has a much more negative or sort of like foreboding connotation than it used to, where it just meant decision, judgment. Okay, if there's nothing else, I've got to say I'm not super seeing any big connections. Maybe river bark is sort of like harkening back to this bridge idea, or connecting with that bridge idea. The doom of a few men, or few among men, if far means few, I think it could mean something else, and I'm not remembering what else it could possibly mean here. My actual opinion you will find a few sessions ago when we were actually reading this, because I was a lot more fresh on my reviewing of this stanza. But that's sort of more negative, potentially. But it's all very plain, I guess. It's a big bridge. It's the bark of the river. It is the roof of the waves. And it's sort of the doom of some people. Okay, let's move on to Yer. I'm getting the feeling we might not finish today, but I don't know. I'm hopeful. I think we can, if we move along, we can do it. Yer bith gumena hecht von God lateth. Hali helvenes kunning hruzan sillan. Berta bleda bernum an tharvam. So, Yer. It means it's the origin of the word year. It means year, but it also means sort of the harvest cycle, the return of the harvest. The Old Norse and Old Icelandic have more of a connotation that comes from harvest, where it's just like abundance. Think of like a cornucopia type situation, that sort of association with harvest or yearly cycle. But in Old English, it's a little bit more like year. But it has a lot of the same connotations, and that's what we can kind of see by reading the poem. Yer, in more standard West Saxon would be jar. Jar bith gumena hecht. It is the hope of men. Funne God lateth. When God provides. When God yields. Hali helvenes kunning. Holy heaven's king. Hruzan sillan. Gives to the earth. Sells to the earth. Sell, in Old English, we talked about this when we read this poem. Sellan can just mean give, transfer, rather than specifically in a transaction. It can just be give as well, especially in poetry. Berte bleda beornum anthervum. Bright Bleda is sort of like flowering or sort of yield. It can be the fruits of something. It can also mean prosperity, and more generally, bright prosperity. It kind of depends on the gender of blad here. This is more simply blad rather than blade, but both senses make sense. And then to nobles and the needy alike. So we've got the year, the harvest, being a hopeful thing if the harvest is good, if God provides. Now we get hægl kynning, and something I don't remember pointing out when we read this originally, although to be fair, this was many, many weeks ago when we were reading the Old English rune poem. But hægl kynning makes sense as a description of God, Holy Heaven's King. But one connection I didn't think about at the time was that the month of, that if you shift the calendar around to kind of match up our own a little bit better, the month that we call September in Old English is called hægl månad. Hægl, this word here, hægl kynning, Holy Heaven's King, but hægl månad is September, which is like sort of the first big harvest month. And it might be why it was called hægl månad, holy month, because there may have been some kind of festival celebrating the harvest, as exists in many cultures. Harvest festivals are a big thing in cultures that have yearly harvests. So that might be why it's called holy month, because there's lots of harvest celebrations at that time. All right, let's go on to the Norwegian and Icelandic ones. And there's actually a connection I forgot. Maybe I pointed this out. But they all use the same word for man here. In fact, they all use a cognate word for man, followed by either the word good in the Norse case or hope in the English case. And that's not something I noticed before. So we've got or gumna góði, getikat or var fróði. So sort of bounty is good of men, is the good, the benefit, the goods of men, is the good thing for people, but specifically men. Guma more than any of these other sort of like formulaic poetic words that refer to men but really just refer to everyone. Guma in prose just tends to mean man, gender-wise as well. Of course, in poetry it doesn't have to have that meaning, again, because of this formulaic thing where men can just mean everyone, but it alliterates with G, which is, I think, the important bit here. And that's another thing I want to point out. We get this G alliteration, which in both the Icelandic and Norwegian rune poems, the alliteration does not have to be with the name of the rune. And it doesn't alliterate with the name of the rune. We've got odd here. In both, in Old Norse, just in general, Norwegian and Icelandic, when you have an initial y sound, like we do in Old English, we have yad, we have year in modern English with a y, it goes away when all that follows it is a vowel. It pretty much always goes away. It does not in West Germanic languages like Old English, though. But what's really interesting here is we have alliteration with a G in this stanza regardless, because we have gumena and god here. But yad also starts with a G in Old English. And by Old English standards, yad does alliterate with the other two words. A lot of the time, it seems that lines of alliterative verse seem to have alliterated before sound changes underwent their thing. And we saw some examples of this in the runata. We were talking about like how wolf and, or not, it wasn't wolf, it was words and works no longer alliterate in Old Norse, but they would have originally, and they do, and that formula is used in West Germanic languages. So that kind of thing does happen. This is almost the reverse, though. So there are some times where a G alliterates with another G, but one G has a Y sound and one G has a G sound, because originally they both had a G sound, and then the sound change happened that caused some G's to become Y. Here that's not happening. It's more like there was a Y sound that was just originally a Y sound. It just comes to be spelled with a G. And because there's already other examples where Y and G alliterate, they can also alliterate here. Although you don't have to analyze this as alliterating for it to still work, because we have two. The G's that matter are galled here. That's the most important one. It has to exist. In the second half line, there has to be at least one alliterating word. And there needs to be at least one in the first half, which even if yer didn't alliterate, gomena does. I just wanted to mention that a little bit in terms of the alliteration rules. But it's interesting that we get an alliteration not just with G, but on the word gomena in all three, even though different words are used. Like, if we use a different word for good here, there are plenty of other words for benefit or good. In Old English, we use the word hope, hicht. That doesn't need to alliterate. So it's interesting that gomena is still here, alliterating with god here. It's not gold, cognate with golden. It's not. It's a different word. It's God. But it's interesting that goldi is the word that they chose. It's almost as if gumna has to be there. Were the rune poets in Norway and or Iceland familiar with the Old English one where they used gomena? Or they just coincidentally happen to choose the same word for man out of the many, many, many that we've seen are available, and many others that we haven't seen yet that are available? They picked one that started with a G, and they picked the same one that exists in Old English. It's just very conspicuous to me. I don't know. It seems interesting. I don't think it, like, which word for man you use doesn't really change the meaning of the poem, really. But it's interesting that that's the choice of alliteration that comes up. And I really don't know what to make of it, but it's interesting. So I still haven't even talked about the second half of this stanza. Getek at or var frodi. I opine, I think that Frodi was open, was generous with things. We talked about that when we read the Norwegian poem, if you want to hear more about that whole thing. But the important thing here is that it's plenty is the good of men. Just like plenty is the hope of men. Harvest is the hope of men if it's a good turnout. Now let's see the Icelandic. We get, again, od er gumna godi. I should probably underline the godi here, too, because that's the same between the two. The Norwegian likes to spell it with an E instead of an I. Sort of a dialectal difference. Godi. E. The A sound varies between like A and E between Old Norwegian and Old Icelandic. So Norwegian writes it with an E, so it's more like the A, and then Icelandic writes it more with an I, so it's more like E. It's the same word, though. Whoa. Sorry that this is happening. I don't know why that's happening. Okay. Ok gott sumar al groen akker annus alvard. So, once again, the year is the good of men. And gott sumar, and a good summer. So if it's a good summer, you have a good harvest. That kind of echoes the Old English a bit. If God provides, it's a good year. Allgrön akker, thriving. Akker is collective crops. It's related to the word akker in Old English. Acre is the word we get in modern English from akker in Old English. And there's a Latin cognate, ager, from which words like agriculture derive. So that is the Icelandic one. And then annus is our Latin word year. It's the word year. So this just kind of reminds us there at least was probably some awareness that this word meant year originally, if not in sense in the poem. It doesn't really mean year, it means more like harvest or plenty. But the sense of year is still salient because they're translating it with the Latin word for year. So that is the year rune. Let's go to the next one. We've got Síl semanum sembla bithon hægta. We've got hægta again. There's a lot of hægta in the Old English rune poem. If you haven't noticed, there's a lot of hope in this one. Alright. Síl semanum sembla bithon hægta. Thona hi hina feriath over fishes bath. Oth he brimhenges bringeth tolanda. Okay. So, Síl semanum simblebith on hit. Síl, we talked about this quite a bit. Síl has two potential readings. It could be a weird form of the word sæl, which means a sail. It could also be síl, meaning a sign or a beacon. That's a very rare meaning of it. That would be sort of cognate to the word sigil, and it's a borrowing from Latin. And then the other one is that it can mean, síl is a rare, but does show up in some other places, word for sun, like the sun. And the sun is what it means in the other two rune poems. That is why I translate it in the way that I do. I think I went with sun when I talked about this stanza originally, but then in a later section I did talk about how there's this other interpretation that makes just as much sense. The word sail is a lot more of a common word than síl is. However, the rune poem, and just runes in general, are more of almost an arcane thing in Anglo-Saxon culture, or in Old English culture. And it's not surprising that A, just in poetry in general, but also B, in an old poem like this, that a rare word for sun would be used. But both meanings make sense, I believe. So we've got sail/sun is always a hope for seamen, people on the sea, when they fare over the fish's bath, the sea, until they bring their ocean horse, their brimhenges, their seahorse, their boat, to land. When they bring it over to land. So, sail makes sense. Sail is a hope for sailors. They need a sail, don't they? But the sun is also hope. It's better than seeing storm clouds. Pardon me. So, Sol landa ljome, luti ek helgum dome. We've got the sun, sol. Landa ljome is the light, ljoma, of lands. Ljomi, not ljoma. I was reading that as if it were lauma in Old English. Lauma is the cognate in Old English that means light, as in a light source. So it is a light source for the lands of the world. Luti ek helgum doma. Luti ek, I bow down to the doom, the judgment, helgum. Helgum is holy. Divine judgment is what I bow down to. Alright. Cool. Sol skya skjaldur, och skinandi röðul och isa aldurtregi rota siklingur. Oh man, I should have brought those other stanzas about with röðul and rota that I wanted to talk about. We've had skia already, didn't we? We had ur skia gråter. It was like rain showers are from the sky. Here we have the sun is the shield of the sky, and a shining röðul is a radiating thing, shining shiner, I guess. This word röðul is cognate with the word rador in Old English, which means sky. It's one of the poetic words for sky, but it means more like light in Old Norse, or a beam of light. Och isa aldurtregi. Aldurtregi is life ender of ice, because sun kills ice. And then we get rota siklingur. Rota is Latin for like wheel. And I talked before about how in, I think it's Alvismal, where the dwarf Alvis talks about different names for the sun, and one of the names was like Huerwanda Hægl. I think it's like something like the elves call it Huerwanda Hægl, which is the spinning wheel, the whirring wheel. So rota for sun is really interesting, because there's also a similar phrase somewhere in Old English poetry, and I wanted to grab these stanzas and bring them, but I forgot, because there's just so many different stanzas to talk about today. Okay, let's go to the next one. I'm very much feeling like we are not going to finish this day, and we'll need to do one more day of comparison. But that's okay, because that gives me a chance to bring some of those stanzas and talk about them, potentially. Alright. Tyr bith takna sum held trua well, with avalingas bith onfarlde, over nihta yenipu navras swiketh. So we talked quite a good deal about how this seems to be talking about the North Star, Polaris, and we talked about how the god Tyr, the Old Norse god Tyr, the Old English god Tyr especially, but the Norse god Tyr as well, might have been associated with the planet Polaris. Not planet, sorry. A star. Polaris is a star. And it's the opposite of a planet, because it doesn't move. It stays in its place. It navra swiketh. It never falters. Tyr, however, we talked about how Tyr means victory in Old English. It's a very weird thing where maybe there's a few possibilities. The R might be a miswriting of a win. You can see if the win wasn't completely connected, it could look like an R, and that could have looked like an R to Hicks, and he mistranscribed it. It's also possible that the poet of the time, like the Christian, not poet, but Christian scribe, writing down whatever copy this is originally from, didn't know who Tyr was. It's possible. It seems like a lot of the early English still had an idea, at least of the names of a lot of the deities, because they still use them in things like genealogies. But it's possible that a scribe might have seen Tyr and thought it was a mistake and corrected it to a word that made more sense to them, which is Tyr, victory. Victory is a token, is some token. It is one token. It holds very well with nobles. It is ever on the journey. Over the night's darkness, it never fails, never falters. Victory doesn't make as much sense with all of this specific language about travel and the night. The understanding of a star, especially because this word takna, takn is where we get the word token. All this talk about, this word shows up in sort of zodiac type discussions in Old English literature as well. So the interpretation of this as Polaris makes a lot of sense. It's the North Star. It's reliable on journeys over the darkness of night. It's bright. It holds well, trua well. It holds faith well. It is a token. It is a beacon. So the idea that this was Tyr and it referred to Polaris makes a lot of sense. victory can also make sense, that victory never fails, but if you're not victorious, then it fails, doesn't it? It's an area of contention. Still, a lot of people still debate this stanza. I am of the opinion that Tiu as Polaris makes a lot of sense, and we get Tyr in both other stanzas in the other two rune poems. We got Tyr at Einhänder. Oh, why did I forgot? I added that G in there, or not G, that H. The original doesn't have an H, but the Norwegian drops H's a lot. So Einhänder Asa, sorry, not this is in Icelandic. Asa opt varður smiður at blasa. So Tyr is one-handed among the gods. Often, the smiður becomes varður, having to blow. Often the smith has to blow on whatever tool they're using. Not sure what to make of that second round. But the one-handed god is probably a reference to Tyr putting his hand in the mouth of Fenrisulfur to get bitten off. We get that reference here. Tyr einhänder as och ulfs leifar, the remnant of the wolf, och hova hilmi, Mars tiki. And here we get the connection with Mars, not the planet, but the god, because Mars is associated with war, and the Norse associated Tyr with war. That's that connection there. Tuesday, Tiu, being the Old English version, Tuesday, is the day of Mars in Latin. Martes dies Martes, hence Martes in Spanish, mardi in French, martedi in Italian, etc. So we get that reference there in the Icelandic. Hova hilmi, and Hova hilmi, the helm, the prince of Hov, Hov is like a temple. And I think I talked about this when we talked about the Icelandic group. Okay, we're going to stop at Tyr there. Not really many connections that we can make directly across from the Old Norwegian and Icelandic to the Old English, unless we do want to say that Tyr was originally Tiu here, in which case it's the same deity being referenced. But the other content is not as clear as a connection or a contrast, really. So that's where we're going to stop. We're going to do the last few next time. And that will be the end of our rune adventures for now. Rune poem adventures, at least. We can still read more runes. I would like to look at some other rune artifacts. But that will end our rune poem explorations for now, because after that we are going to start Sir Orfeo, and I'm very excited to do some Middle English reading with you all. Alright, thank you for everyone who is here, and thank you for everyone in the future watching this. I still will implore you to leave comments if there are connections that you notice or contrasts that you want to point out in the YouTube comments. I will read those and try to respond if I see them. I probably will. Like, share, subscribe, all those YouTube-y things if you would like. If you know people who would be interested in just sitting there, watching me sit here reading this kind of stuff, feel free to share. The like and subscribe part, definitely. The share part, I know this kind of thing is an acquired taste. So, at your discretion. But thank you, and have a good rest of whatever your time zone situation is like, and goodbye.